preaching theme during this Valentine's Day month has been appropriately love. So as we continue with the love theme this morning, let's begin with the wisdom of some kids. These particular children were asked what love means. 5-year-old Carl says, "Love is when a girl puts on perfume and a boy puts on shaving cologne and they go out on a date and smell each other." 7-year-old Danny observes, "Love is when my mommy makes coffee for my daddy and she takes a sip just to make sure it's okay." 5-year-old Elaine says, "Oh, listen closely, ladies. Love is when mommy gives daddy the best piece of chicken." 7-year-old Kristen affirms, "Love is when mommy sees daddy smelly and sweaty," and still says he's handsomer than Robert Redford. 7-year-old Noelle shares from her own experience, "Love is when you tell a guy you like his shirt, and so he wears it every day." This wonderful definition of love comes from 8-year-old Rebecca. "When my grandma got arthritis, she couldn't bend over and paint her toenails anymore. So now my grandpa does it for her all the time, even though his hands got arthritis too." That's love. And Jessica is an 8-year-old going on 30 who says, "You really shouldn't say I love you unless you mean it. But if you mean it, you should say it a lot. People forget." And Jenny, also 8, reminds us there are 2 kinds of love: our love and God's love. But God makes both kinds. And finally, how many of us are familiar with the work of author-lecturer Leo Buscaglia? Is that name familiar? Maybe to some of us it is. He tells about a contest that he was once asked to judge. The purpose of the contest was to identify the most caring child out of a group of caring children. The winner was a 4-year-old whose next-door neighbor was an elderly gentleman who had recently lost his lifelong wife. Seeing the man cry, the little boy went onto the old gentleman's porch where he was sitting on his porch swing. He climbed into his lap and he just sat there. Later, when his mother asked him what he'd said to the kind but grieving old neighbor, the little boy said, "Nothing. I just helped him cry." I'd like to review where Pastor Ron has taken us these past 2 Sundays. You'll remember that he's been using as a framework Christian theologian and writer C.S. Lewis's book, The 4 Loves. Lewis points out the limitations and ambiguities that arise from the fact that in our English language we really have only one word for love. And of course, we all know that this can be sometimes problematic. I mean, shouldn't there be a way to differentiate between me when I say to my wife, "Mary, I'm glad you've been my Valentine for 40 years. I love you. I loved you yesterday. I love you today, and I will love you forever"? Shouldn't there be a way to differentiate that from me dipping my French fry at McDonald's and saying, "I really love ketchup"? Well, back to the 4 loves. Keeping in mind that the New Testament was originally written in Greek, to help us to better understand love in the Bible, C.S. Lewis gives us 4 different New Testament Greek words, each of which gets translated into English as love. The first is storge. This is a word which could be translated as affection. This is the "I love French fries" kind of love. This is the love of a certain favorite well-worn pair of soft and comfortable bedroom slippers. It's that kind of love. Some have said that storge love is the kind of love we have for a playful puppy. How many like a playful puppy? Oh, sure. Or for somebody else's cute little children. Because it is a kind of on the surface of things love. So, storge is affection. Philia, you remember, is a part of the city named Philadelphia. What does Philadelphia mean? What is it? The city of brotherly love. And this, of course, is friendship love. It's that sense of positive connection between persons who share interests, share values, share activities in common. And we know this can become a really strong bond. It's philia, it's friendship love. During this sermon series, we've not yet spoken about eros. This is the Valentine's Day romance kind of love, and although eros can include a mutual yearning between two people for lovemaking, its essence is not so much sensually erotic as it is a strong desire on the part of both parties to both be totally possessing and at the same time totally possessed by the other person. One more time. What characterizes eros more than anything else is that yearning for me to possess you completely and for you to possess me completely. Eros, romantic love. And then finally, this Sunday morning, our preaching love word is agape. I had a 7th grader in a confirmation class one time. I was introducing these concepts and talked about agape, and she said, "You mean a fish?" Well, she had guppies. Okay, no. Agape is godly love. It's the kind of love that's in John 3:16. If you happen to know it, I learned it in the King James Version years ago. Please say it loud with me. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Notice that storge, philia, and eros all have a self component, a self-need component, even while they involve a relationship with something or someone else. Agape is, on the other hand, mainly a selfless love. A love that brings forth caring actions regardless of circumstances. To love someone in an agape way means to act for their ultimate good, even if you don't like them. Did you catch that? To do something for a person's ultimate good, even if you don't happen to like them. So when Jesus says, as it's recorded in Luke chapter 6, love your enemies, he uses the word agape. As does Paul in the text from Romans we heard read this morning when he writes, but God proves his agape, God proves his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Agape love doesn't need to be earned or deserved. Agape love is undeserved, unconditional, selfless, and sacrificial. To illustrate, I need to tell you about 3 friends. They were soldiers on holiday. They were part of a band of brothers who had service in Vietnam in common. These 3 also shared a passion for fishing. Any fishermen among us? It can be a passion. One summer weekend, their brotherly friendship love was unexpectedly overshadowed by circumstances which elicited an act of agape love. Here's what happened. I was an Army chaplain stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas back in 1977. I was young. I was new to chaplaincy. I was a chaplain captain. And at mid-afternoon on a Sunday, I think Marion and I were just sitting around talking, reading the Sunday paper and so forth. I got a phone call from the sergeant major of my combat engineer battalion with some bad news. Command Sergeant Major Lynch said to me, "Chaplain, we need your help with the death notifications." Maybe you know that if a soldier is lost during wartime, or even in peacetime, if a soldier is killed in a training accident or in some other unexpectedly tragic way, an officer or senior NCO and a chaplain are sent to the home of that soldier's parents or wife to bring the sad news and to offer the soldier's family personal and spiritual support. There were 5 companies in our engineer battalion, each with its own company commander and first sergeant. That particular weekend, one of our first sergeants had purchased a new boat. The boat itself wasn't new, but it was new to him. He and a sergeant first class friend from our battalion were fishing buddies, and the sergeant first class had another sergeant first class friend from another battalion who had similar interests, and so they arranged with their wives to be gone for the weekend, camping and fishing at Tuttle Creek Reservoir near Junction City in Fort Riley. And of course, while they were fishing, the girls, the wives, planned to do some girl things together. You know, beauty salon and shopping kinds of things. The husbands had had a successful Friday night and Saturday morning with plans to fish until they got their limit. The problem was none of them had been boat owners before. And Tuttle Creek Reservoir was not a little lake. And that Saturday afternoon, a fierce wind came up. But the men didn't have the experience to be wary of weather warnings. The winds blew so powerfully and the waves were so high that no one was supposed to be out in the lake under those circumstances. Nevertheless, they powered up the boat and they plowed through the rough waves to a more secluded part of the lake that they had observed when fishing the day before. It was a remote cove where the tops of some dead trees still poked above the water, where the pre-reservoir woods had been drowned after the dam had been completed and the water rose. This more sheltered area would be, the men assumed, a more ideal location for the kind of fish that they were interested in catching. As they arrived at this cove, the winds were getting even stronger and the waves were splashing high enough to induce some seasickness, and the men decided that they should get off the lake after all. But it was too late. The motor on this new used boat died, and First Sergeant Robinson was not familiar enough with the idiosyncrasies of this particular boat to be able to get the motor restarted. So without power, the boat was even more vulnerable to the winds and waves, and the boat capsized. And the sergeant first class from that other battalion was hit on the head by the boat when it flipped, and he was drowned immediately. And First Sergeant Robinson and the other sergeant first class, oh, by the way, they had not taken any life preservers. The first sergeant and the other sergeant first class from our battalion were able to swim to a couple of those tree trunks that were poking up above the 15 feet of water that was in the lake. First Sergeant Robinson was a big man. This was in the early years before the Army started its now mandatory weight control program. So he was a big man, and he had a big belt, and he was able to get it off. He was able to loop it back together, and there was a part of a branch, the remains of a branch poking out from the trunk, so he was able to throw the belt over that and then get it under his arm to help him hold on, even though he was hanging on for dear life here and here. The sergeant first class made a courageous decision. Unlike First Sergeant Robinson, who was near retirement and quite heavy, he was in excellent shape. He was one of the stars of our semi-annual Army PT test. He said to First Sergeant Robinson, "I'm a strong swimmer. I'll go for help." Jesus' words again come to mind. No one has greater agape. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. I'd like to shift our attention from this courageous act of agape love to the overwhelming needs of those who were left behind. The chaplain support I was called upon to give that afternoon is in so many ways akin to the kind of support which Stephen ministers are trained and equipped and by spiritual predisposition able to provide. I won't ever forget approaching the front door of the family quarters of the Sergeant First Class, where the notifying officer and myself were expecting to find his wife. But of course, she wasn't home yet. The kids had a teenage babysitter, and Mom was spending Sunday afternoon at the mall with the other two wives of his group of friends. So the officer and I left and waited out in the car in the parking lot, talking quietly, waiting. We also shared prayer. When the wife got home, we waited until she was inside, and then we knocked on the door. Morris Hill Chapel was in the neighborhood, and she told us later that she had thought we were visitors from the chapel coming to ask her family to join us every Sunday for worship. When instead we shared our sad news, she screamed, and she collapsed, and she sobbed, and she sobbed, and she sobbed, and within a few minutes, still greatly agitated, she phoned long distance to her husband's parents, both to break the bad news to them and to receive and give mutual support, and we could hear his mother crying on the phone. A little later, one of her next-door neighbors, another girlfriend, was able to babysit. While she had me accompany her to Irwin Army Hospital morgue because she had to be able to see her husband, she said she absolutely could not believe this was more than just a bad dream until she had a chance to see him and had a chance to say goodbye. First Sergeant Robinson also greatly needed pastoral care and support. I visited him in his quarters the next day. He was still in shock. The cove where they capsized was so far off the beaten path that he had to desperately hang onto that tree trunk through a very long Saturday night, and nobody had seen him or the capsized boat until late Sunday morning. No one had missed the men because they were expected to be camping until late Sunday afternoon. As I was visiting with him, First Sergeant Robinson had on a t-shirt and shorts because special medication had to be smeared at his elbows and his knees where he'd been hanging onto that dead tree trunk for dear life, half submerged in lake water for more than 18 hours. He was a man of faith, and he had a story of God's presence in that difficult situation. He told me, "Chaplain, in the middle of the night, the devil was after me. He gave me this vision of a sidewalk just out of reach, stretching from my tree to the shore, and the devil kept whispering to me, 'You'll be all right, you'll be all right, just let go and push off to the sidewalk. You'll be able to climb up out of the water and just walk to shore.' But I know that the devil is the prince of lies, and so I kept praying, 'Help me, Jesus, help me, Jesus.' And the Lord did help me. And I was able to hang on until help came. At his friend's funeral, I read from Psalm 107, especially for First Sergeant Robinson. And it was particularly helpful to him, who trusted that while its promise was not in this situation fulfilled physically for all three of these friends, the psalm was indeed fulfilled spiritually for all, because God's love in heaven are indeed the desired haven for all of us. Some went down to the sea in ships, doing busyness on the mighty waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, how his wondrous works in the deep. For he commanded and raised the stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. They mounted up to heaven. They went down to the depths. Their courage melted away in their calamity. They reeled and staggered like drunkards and were at their wits' end. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. And they were glad because they had quiet. And he brought them to their desired haven. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wonderful works to humankind. Let them extol him in the congregation of the people, and praise him in the assembly of the elders. I wish we had had Stephen Ministry there at Fort Riley, because as long as she was still there, until she finally moved back to her home state, to her home, to be near family, she could certainly have used a Stephen minister, a regular companion in Christ. And likewise, First Sergeant Robinson. Perhaps God has given you a caring heart and gifts for compassion. Would you please give attention now to this brief video clip that explains Stephen Ministry as a unique way to share your God-gifted inclinations?
Sometimes.
I'm sorry, that's not the one. That's not
very
I'm sorry.
If you're like me, you feel stressed often. You don't know what the future holds.
Sometimes the machinery
think about you.
Sometimes the machinery doesn't do what we want it to, and it's just one of those moments. While he's trying to find that, let me share with you that in the pews you will find.
February 6, 1991.
Here we go.
It's a day that I'll never forget. It's the day when I discovered our 18-year-old son, Denny, had died in his sleep. My world was turned upside down. Me and my whole family struggled for years to find a new normal. To be honest, my life was a mess as I struggled with my anger toward God and my feelings of total despair. People would often come to me and ask me how my wife Beulah and Andy were doing. I wondered when someone would come and ask how I was doing. And then one day it happened. Ed Downs came to me and said, "Dennis, I'm going to meet you at Jumping Catfish." So we met there, and after we'd ordered our food, he turned, looked me straight in the eye, and he said, "Now, Dennis, I want to know how you're doing." You know, I can still remember the kindness in his eyes when he showed a sincere interest in me and what I was doing for him. And across the years, I've come to realize how important it is to have someone to journey with us when we go through the valleys, the tough times. And as pastors here at the church, we have people coming in nearly every day with stories that can break your heart. People who have just received a diagnosis of cancer, stories of unemployment, sadness because a loved one has died. We hear stories of divorce, and we see the pain on the faces of those who've been rejected by someone who once loved them. Well, the list goes on and on, and sometimes as pastors, we feel like firemen, just running from one fire to another. To be honest, we need help dealing with some of the tough things that life throws at us. However, I often hear people say, "I want to help, but I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do." We have a wonderful ministry here at the church called the Stephen ministry. And in this ministry, a Stephen minister is matched up one-to-one, a man with a man, a woman with a woman. And the Stephen minister is given 50 hours of training, and then we commission them. And then we assign them to one of these hurting people. And you meet with them at least an hour a week. We provide excellent training so that you know how to be a good listener. You know how to deal with the grief of the person that you're with. You learn what to say, what not to say. Stephen ministers are not therapists, but they know how to be fully present with people in a confidential way. Across the years, I've noticed that those people who have gone through the hard places, they're the ones who are best able to help those who are going through them now. So if you've been wounded by some of the tragedies of life, I hope that you will consider taking this training so that you too can be a part of this Stephen ministry team, and that you too can become a wounded healer. I encourage you to stop by the table, pick up that packet, talk to one of our Stephen ministers, and then pray about this matter. This may be just the ministry that you've been looking for.
This is actually a church in Olathe, Kansas. The inserts that are placed in the pews give you an opportunity to consider joining us on the 7th of March when we begin another round of Stephen ministry training. There's also an opportunity here to list your own name as a person perhaps being interested in having a Stephen minister for yourself, or a place to note that you have a friend or acquaintance in mind who might benefit from having a Stephen minister. Although, please, if that's the case, put your name here, not theirs, so that we can preserve confidentiality, and then I can talk with you about who that person is and whether they'd be willing to call me to talk about the Stephen ministry, or let me call them. Also, it's here so that you can have a tear-off with the names of those who are currently in Stephen ministry here in our congregation, so that if you'd like to call on us to visit about it, we can. Thank you very much, friends. God bless. Let's stand and sing our closing hymn.